Well, good evening everyone, and welcome to a very, very special event. I'm your host, Tom from Ludicrous Feed. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on a very special broadcast. We are talking about the New South Wales Government's EV policy tonight, and we've got very special guests from the New South Wales Government to chat about that. But to start with, let's welcome our regulars, of course, Riz from Carloop. Hey Riz, how's it going?
Hey Tom, I'm well. How are you going?
I'm very well, Riz. Are you excited about tonight?
I am. Should be a good one. I think everyone should be watching. We'll be playing State of EV Origin
Oh
tonight.
yeah, cannot wait. You know which state's winning at the moment?
We'll have them here tell us all about it.
That's right, that's right. I cannot wait. And yeah, so welcome to everyone watching live tonight on the live chat, both on YouTube and also on LinkedIn for the first time ever. So yeah, looking forward to hearing your questions and comments, and also if you're watching on replay as well. And we've also got our other regular guest with Mr. Rahul Prasad. Hello, Rahul. How are you? Okay, so Rahul is he's probably testing his equipment, so we will get him on very shortly. All right, so without further ado, let's welcome our three guests from the New South Wales Government. We've got Mr. Dave Malachy, Rebecca Williamson, and Anna Martinez. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are you all?
Evening. Going
Hello,
great. Thank you,
good.
Tom. Hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Nice to see you all, and I love your backgrounds too from the New South Wales Government, of course. They're all from the Office of Energy and Climate Change. First of all, we've got Mr. David Malachy, who's the team lead for Net Zero Transport. We've got Anna Martinez, who is the EV Fleets lead, and
Hello.
Rebecca Williamson, who is the EV Destinations and Curbside Charging lead. So nice to have you all tonight.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks
I
for
think we're at
having
an
us.
advantage. We're at an advantage here because no other of the other states are here. So
That's right. Right. Not quite a fair fight tonight, but that's okay. You've got the soapbox, so go ahead and tell us all about it. All right. So what we'll do tonight is, of course, we'll chat about. I'll just add this to the stream. This picture here, which is the New South Wales electric vehicle strategy. That's what we're talking about tonight. We've got some questions and comments, but those of you watching live tonight, make sure you flash your comments as well on the screen. If we see a question that's good, that's important, we'll of course present it to our guests. And there's a poll on tonight as well. So those of you watching on YouTube, I've got a question tonight, which is, when it comes to DC chargers, what is the most important thing for EV drivers in 2022? Please select one. We've got the options are reliability, more charging stalls per location, faster charging speeds, or distance between chargers. So they are the four options. And currently as it stands, it looks like 43% of you are saying more charging stalls per location. That seems to be the winner at the moment, followed by reliability at 34%. So that's very interesting. So if you don't feel that's true, make sure you vote, and vote early. Get yourself, make yourself known and heard. Okay, so Dave, Rebecca, and Anna. So we'll just start off with a bit of a prelude. So I guess the ministers forward in this document here, the electric vehicle strategy from New South Wales Government. I'll just bring it here. These were the ministers at the time who wrote this, or helped write this document. The Honourable Andrew Constance MP, and also the Honourable Matt Keane MP, who was then the Minister for Energy and Environment, who's now the State Treasurer, of course. But I'll just summarise their forward from the New South Wales Electric Vehicle Strategy document, which was published in 2021 from both members of Parliament. They said EVs are high-performing vehicles that are cheaper to run, quieter on the road, and do not emit tailpipe air pollution or greenhouse gas emissions. They also stand to dramatically improve health outcomes for communities, particularly pregnant women and babies, people with chronic illnesses, and the elderly, through reduced toxic exhaust emissions, which I agree with 100%. So fast forward to 2022, 1 year later, what does the New South Wales Government hope to achieve with the electric vehicle strategy?
yeah, okay. I'll start with this one. So a year's passed, and our ambition is the same, although probably a bit enhanced this year. Really, the first target we have and the first ambition is to make New South Wales both the easiest and most affordable place to buy and operate an electric vehicle in Australia. And so that talks to both the purchase, the upfront purchase price of EVs, as well as operating them and charging them out in public and so forth. So that's our ambition. Alongside that, we have a sales target or a sales ambition. That's what we've oriented the strategy around. So what we're aiming for in New South Wales is that at least 50% of new car sales in 2030 will be electric vehicles, and the vast majority by 2035. And so that's an acceleration of the modelled uptake of electric vehicles throughout the rest of the decade. So we're accelerating the uptake in New South Wales. The strategy itself focuses in on the key barriers to uptake. So it's really oriented at those key things that are the issues and the troubles and the problems around uptake at the moment. So that's price, that's choice, and it's also range anxiety or perceived range anxiety or access to public charging infrastructure. And so that therefore the strategy has a range of planks or initiatives that are focused on all of those things. So there's a rebate, there's stamp duty exemption, there's a fleets incentive, and all of those things are oriented at the upfront costs. And we've got a range of different work streams around creating public charging infrastructure. We'll talk about that throughout the night, everything from fast charging infrastructure to curbside chargers and charging within buildings and so forth. But really in New South Wales, the focus is we're undertaking this task through an emissions reduction lens. And that's really important. So we want to reduce our impact on climate. It's part of our broader net zero plans in New South Wales and our net zero plan to get to net zero by 2050. Transport's a really important part of that picture as well. And as you read out at the beginning, there's all these other benefits. So it's about benefits capture, right? So it's about cleaning our air, quieter streets, reduced reliance on imported foreign oil, those kind of things. And then finally, in this year's budget, New South Wales added another $38 million of effort to the strategy as well. So in total, $633 million. It's the strongest investment in electric vehicle uptake across Australia. And that additional funding is focused in on charging infrastructure largely, which we'll talk about a bit later.
Yep. No, that's great. Yeah, look, charging is definitely, one of the biggest hurdles, definitely, and so certainly something that needs to roll out in our state, New South Wales, and across the country. That's why I guess tonight's poll is focused on charging, and we'll get to the results a bit later on, of course. In that same Minister's Forward, the Minister's plan to make New South Wales the easiest and most affordable place to buy and use an EV in Australia, as you've said, Dave. The crux of the EV strategy can be summarised by 5 actions, as you can see on the screen in front of us. 1, helping drivers to buy an EV. 2, building a world-class electric vehicle charging network. 3, making it easy to drive an EV. 4, creating jobs and growing the economy. And 5, keeping road funding fair and sustainable. In tonight's discussion, I want to discuss each of these points as much as I can. Let's start with the first one, helping drivers to buy an EV and the much publicised incentives that New South Wales has offered to EV owners, namely. Do you want to go through that for us, Dave, Rebecca and Anna?
I'll just quickly start and then hand over to Anna perhaps. So there's a few planks. So there's a $3,000 rebate in New South Wales, and that's for new electric vehicles with a dutiable value under $68,750. So that's the setting there. That's for the general public and also for small businesses that have 9 or fewer vehicles. And there's 25 of those on offer 25,000 of those on offer in New South Wales, and we've expended around 3,000 or so. So we're moving along towards that target, right? Following the uptake trends that we've seen lately. There's also stamp duty exemption, or it's been eliminated for electric vehicles in New South Wales under $78,000. And so in a few years' time, when we hit 2027, at the minimum, stamp duty will be eliminated for electric vehicles regardless of the price. But at the moment, it's set at $78,000, roughly around the luxury car tax threshold. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Anna, did you have something to add as well?
I think these are the two main measures. I think the other measure probably that could be featured here is the electric vehicle fleet incentive, but maybe we can unpack that later when we address the fleet package. But also that one, it's a package of incentives to support financially whoever wants to procure vehicles.
Yep, no, that's great. I think this is probably one of the better incentives, state by state, of course, in Australia. And certainly, I think 25,000 cars seems very generous. How does that compare to population-wise to another state like, say, Victoria? I think they've also got a $3,000 rebate too. It seems New South Wales has got probably a better capture with 25,000 cars.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I guess the question about that 25,000 number of cars, how long do you expect that rebate to last? Like how in other words, when do you think the 25,000th EV will be sold in New South Wales? Where's your crystal ball?
Okay, I'll take this one because I love crystal balling, and especially I love modeling. So with a disclaimer, I'm doing crystal balling. So when it comes the time to take out my crystal ball, I always tell David, this is just my best prediction so far. So don't quote me on that. But anyway, apart of the jokes, I think in government, we are trying to do our own modeling, but there are many other organizations out there that do their own. And so our predictions may be correct, but may also not turn right. But what we try to do is to keep them up to date as much as we can and to recheck constantly our assumptions. So now, our initial best, I would like to make a clarification though. The projected 100% uptake of the rebate does not necessarily match the time when we expect that the 25,000th electric vehicle will be sold in New South Wales. And the reason for that is because not necessarily when a new vehicle is sold in New South Wales, that the new buyer will access our rebate. And we are already observing that in how things are unfolding. And that is also being considered in our modeling. So when it comes to the 100% rebate uptake, originally we were thinking, well, we're going to make it throughout financial year 24. So meaning that in the period between July 23 and June 24. However, we are observing quite a bit of constraints in the market, which are more severe compared to the one that we envisaged at the time of the modeling. So the current supply chain constraints are really affecting the market. And so at the moment, we have slightly adjusted our projections towards financial year 25. So we are shifting our thinking around when we're going to have that 100% rebate uptake. When it comes, though, when we think we're going to hit that magic 25,000th electric vehicles sold, we are still thinking that will occur in financial year 24, hopefully. And as early as possible, clearly, with our set package of incentive, we are really hoping that the earlier, the better. So hopefully the market will reset soon. Supply chains will not be as severe as they are, and we can keep up the pace and hit the target.
And we're keeping in mind that there's a threshold, right? 68,750. So new EVs above that threshold aren't eligible. So they'll come in, people will purchase them, but a rebate won't be expended. So what is very difficult to predict is when are the new EVs coming in, the affordable ones, how many are coming in over what time frame? And, if a manufacturer decides to start importing or bringing their EV into Australia, that can change the picture, as we've seen with various models coming in recent months.
Yep. No, for sure. We've heard I think recently that Tesla China waiting time has now dropped to 4 weeks, I believe. Riz might be able to correct me on this for Model Y and Model 3. We know BYD's bringing their cars into Australia. That's a very affordable vehicle. MG is about to be released this month, the new MG ZS, so that's also affordable. So yeah, I mean, that's exciting for me as an EV enthusiast, and I'm sure for everyone in the chat too. So 2024, 25, that's good to know, actually. For those of you in the chat thinking about or on watching replay, thinking about buying an EV, that's when you should, think about pulling the trigger, so to speak, because that's when the incentive might potentially run out if the crystal ball is correct. Thank you.
There's also I should mention finally on that one, there's a dashboard on one of our electric vehicle websites, and that does, I think, quarterly show the number of rebates that have been expended. And of course, that will be done much more regularly as we get closer to that $25,000 mark. So people can see, it's transparent, people can see how many we've that have been expended to date.
Yep, no, that's good. I think we did go through one of those dashboards earlier from 3 months ago. So it's good that you guys are keeping it transparent. All right, so we've got a super chat from Ray Johnson, one of our members. Question is, what year will EVs be the only car in the New South Wales Parliament fleet? Get that crystal ball out again. What do you guys think?
It's a good question. Maybe Anna's got an answer to this one.
Yeah.
Look, I think, you see various politicians of different stripes, both nationally and in different states, starting to drive EVs and talk about it and wanting to have chargers in Parliament House and that kind of thing. I think that's good from a visibility point of view. In New South Wales, one of our streams of work and that Anna's focused in on is around the electrification of our entire passenger fleet in New South Wales. So that's about 12,000 passenger vehicles. It's one of the largest fleets in the Southern Hemisphere, in fact. And so that's vehicles of all types across, not of all types, it's all light vehicles in the New South Wales Government fleet across all of the government clusters. So that's New South Wales Health, it's education, it's property in New South Wales, a range of different different parts of government. And the target is to have that job done by 2030.
Okay, 2030, that's not that far away. All right, so let's move on. And it says, stamp duty will be abolished for all EVs with no upper limit from the 1st of July 2027, or when EVs make up 30% of all new car sales, according to the document that we've just gone through. Which do you think will come first, in your opinion?
Well, I'll answer this one too. I think we have the way how we have put it down in the strategy is by defining two events that we think they will probably occur almost at the same time. So in the way how we originally modeled the strategy is that by July 27, we're going to be probably very close to hitting that 30% target. So if things keep going as we are expecting, probably the two things will happen at the same time. So I think this is kind of the same date that should be considered when people are considering the stamp duty exemption as an advantage. Well, it's also the same time when we expect the 30% of cars, EVs sold in New South Wales to be hit. So it's been probably a way for us just to describe two events that will probably happen concurrently. But we hope that we shall reach the 30% before the stamp duty becomes not anymore an option. So hopefully we can get faster to that target.
Yep, that's good. I mean, I'm no economist, but I think with the S-curve, once you sort of pass that 30%, it goes up pretty quickly, that tangent. So that's very exciting times, I think, in this decade.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And in fact, our modeling shows that sharp ramp up as soon as we hit the 25-30%. There is clearly a number of factors that we have accounted for and we think will take place and will make the ramp up much faster after that.
Yep, no, that's good. So we're 2022 now. The next 5 years are very, very exciting. Can't wait. Okay, so the road user charge will come into play after either of these scenarios, and we'll touch on that later on in the stream. Next question, how is the New South Wales Government incentivising local councils and businesses to buy electric vehicles for their fleets?
Well, all right. Being the fleet girl in the room, I'll try to answer this one.
That's your new name, Anna, the fleet girl.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we have, and I mentioned that earlier when we were describing the set of packages to increase the amount of vehicles that we have on the road. So fleets, businesses, and local government, they can access our EV fleet incentive, which is a package available to support the procurement of battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. But also the financial support includes a contribution for procuring smart chargers. So if you're successful in securing the funding for the vehicle, you can also access a fixed amount for a smart charger. And it's open to local government and businesses. We have two streams, so we whoever is interested can go through the process independently, but they can also rely on organizations that offer fleet management services. This is very common in the market. So usually if you have a fleet and you're a business, you may very likely rely on a fleet management organization. And so we work also with these entities to distribute the funding. We have $105 million available, which is quite a big amount. So we are really keen to spend it. And we're going to do that through a reverse auction mechanism. Probably this is a kind of bit of an innovation. Usually government provides grants through very simple application, relatively simple application process. This time we have decided to go through a reverse auction mechanism to make it probably a little bit more fun, but also to get as much value of money out of this initiative as possible and to put on the road as many vehicles as possible as we can. So it's a reverse auction. It means that if you apply through the process, you are successful if you place a bid which is the least expensive. So not the most expensive, but the least expensive. So we're going to have bidding rounds, and businesses and local government will be able to participate. And with this money, they will be able to procure passenger vehicles, SUVs, but also light commercial vehicles. And we are also allowing light commercial vehicles up to a gross capacity of 4.5 tons. And this is very good because we can also bring on the road more light trucks. So all those nice trucks that go around at the moment in our metropolitan area doing the deliveries for our groceries, but for Uber Eats, all these things that have become quite now a normal thing because of COVID, and people have changed their behaviors and they like more and more home delivery. And this is also bringing on the road more light trucks. We can have also the incentive to facilitate electrification, and so reduce the emissions from this component of the current fleet in New South Wales. So it's this incentive hopefully will help with the financial needs for the procurement of the vehicle, but also, as I said, with the smart charging component of it. And it will address that main barrier that currently fleets have around higher upfront costs when it comes the time to make a decision on which vehicle to buy next.
It's also we're rolling out these reverse auctions through funding rounds, and so there'll be a number of them over the years, and we're in our second funding round now. It's a $15 million funding round. So in funding round one, we supported 850 new battery electric vehicles to get onto the road at a cost of around $4.5 million to government. And it's really important because fleets are a really important part of the ecosystem in terms of electric vehicles and turnover and that kind of thing. I think we're going to touch on that in a second. But it also creates the rigor for fleets to start thinking about total cost of ownership. And so it's not just businesses and fleets that should be thinking about total cost of ownership. It's everybody considering an electric vehicle, and that's something that the shift to EVs has allowed. Whereas the difference in cost between a mid-size petrol vehicle and a larger petrol vehicle might be a little bit, but it's kind of not too consequential. But shifting to an electric vehicle, we know that the operating costs are significantly less from a maintenance and servicing point of view, but also a refueling point of view. They're 5 to 10 times cheaper to fuel than a traditional combustion engine vehicle. And so that ability to look at that upfront cost, more expensive at the moment, and add that and add the operating costs to that picture and look at the full kind of life cycle costs of that vehicle as you own it is a really powerful thing. And it's applied in fields like energy efficiency, like clean tech, that kind of thing. And now it applies in transport with electric vehicles. And that's really a great benefit of EVs.
I guess for me as a consumer, having fleets as EVs, I can see, 3 years, 5 years down the track, fleets have to replenish their cars. We suddenly see, quite late model, low mileage vehicles that are EVs on the second-hand market. Is that also another benefit of trying to get fleets into EVs? Well,
that's the reason why we're doing it as well. So we have this strong focus on fleets because they change their vehicles every 3 to 5 years. And so by working with fleets, we can reach out to the broader community as well. So that's why we have such a strong focus on this segment. And also other reasons, if I can add on that, is because they represent 50% usually of the total sales every year in New South Wales, which means that if we target that 50%, we can go at a very faster pace in replenishing the vehicles that we have in the state. And also because then they flow into the secondary market. So there is this dual benefit, which is great, especially from a policymaker perspective. And also with fleets, what we can do, we can also start testing approaches and pilot projects to understand the benefits from electric vehicles. And this is also something which is common in other countries, like in Europe and in US. We are observing that fleets are commonly used to start testing with EV integration to the building, to the grid, but also testing new business models, for example, considering charging hubs or new ways of ensuring that the charging is provided to the vehicles, going away from the traditional thinking where you have charging stations, but maybe you have different structures and way of how to address that. And fleets can offer, again, the opportunity to test those approaches because of the scale that they can achieve in a relatively shorter period of time.
Yeah, we'll certainly touch on chargers very soon. I mean, as an example, if I was a fleet operator owner and considering transitioning to EVs, how would one go about doing this? What are the kind of the general principles of doing this?
Well, I think the most important principle, I would say, is to start as early as possible. If you have a fleet and you have several vehicles, you want to be prepared because the market will be soon disrupted. And if you need a fleet to do your operations, you want to be ready for that change. And to be ready, you want to have a clear plan. So understand which vehicles to start transitioning first, and then have a clear understanding of what will happen in the next 2, 5, 7 years. So have that clarity from the very start. And then it's about probably identifying low-hanging fruits first. You don't want to start your transition by picking up the vehicles that probably are more operationally challenging. You want to test the technology, understand how it works best for you, understand the pros and cons, which will be different depending on your type of operations and who you are and what your organization does. And so piloting and testing and using those learnings to improve your journey and your planning. And then I think the very, very, very important thing is to start thinking about the charging infrastructure from the very beginning and having a clear understanding of how your charging infrastructure should look like. Because the worst mistake that you could do is just to start procuring vehicles and start putting charging infrastructure along the way. You really want to do your investment in charging at the beginning, understanding what is required, how many chargers you will need, and how this will impact your facilities, your depots, and how you can also integrate down the track public charging infrastructure when it will come online. So it's really wise to have a good plan for any charging requirements that you may have now and in the future, but also think about the potential of the EVs from day zero. So EVs will help fleets and many other users in the market, also because they offer an opportunity to be used as energy assets. So you really want to be able to have a clear plan on how you intend manage your charging for your vehicles. So have a control on them, have a network of chargers which can be controlled remotely, and you can plan when you want the charging sessions to occur. And so you can also achieve savings from an electricity point of view, adding them also to the savings from the running cost reduction. So it's really, again, having a clear plan in mind on how you will manage your charging down the track, how you can optimize it, and also how in the longer term you will be ready also to participate, to utilize the vehicles as energy assets. So I would say it requires a lot of planning and willingness to see the bigger picture and long-term vision in a way that you can do it in a cost-efficiently way, but also in a way that will really bring you all the benefits.
Yep, and presumably the list of approved smart chargers will help with the management of, your charging and your fleet moving forward. I just want to flash up this question or this comment from Greg, one of our members. Actually, I thought this is quite a good observation. With a lot less moving parts and a lot less serviceable items, why would you turn over the fleet so fast? Do you foresee EVs lasting a bit longer in a fleet situation because they require less service? They seem to be lasting quite long nowadays.
Well, what we are observing, though, is that the total cost of ownership is very compelling for fleets because the mileage that they do. And so in terms of running costs, they still stack up very, very much. And so when we talk to fleet managers and when they can do that analysis on their total cost of ownership, they really see the added value for them to go EVs, especially for the mileage component of it. So I think that depending on the operations and depending on the maintenance specific requirement, there will maybe be different cases. But most of the fleets will certainly especially the ones that drive a lot of kilometers, they will especially benefit from electrification anyway.
It's an interesting one too, because we're seeing that in general businesses there's hesitation, there's thinking about what shifting to electric vehicles might mean, and at least a year ago there was a fair amount of concern about the residual value of electric vehicles as well, how that plays out, and we can see that things have changed so much with the supply crunch that and the price of secondhand vehicles that are on the market now. But of course the benefits in the total cost of ownership calculation sit on a part of the side of the ledger. They sit on the owning the vehicle and operating it. That's where the savings come in, right? So there's a benefit to holding on to that vehicle for longer. So I think that we could probably safely say the evidence isn't in there yet. We haven't had 3 to 4 to 5 years yet of fleets owning electric vehicles to really test it out. But the kind of early stage indications are that they might hold them onto them a little longer, particularly perhaps councils and those kind of fleets. So it's to be seen.
I'm sure we'll see that data as well moving forward from the government.
Yeah.
I just want to shout out to a couple of super stickers. Thank you, Team JG, always very nice, and Peter Cook as well. Appreciate that, guys. Very nice. All right, let's move on to charging. EV charging. This is what I'm excited about. So the document and with further revisions highlights $171 million in funding, including $131 million allocated to ultra-fast charging infrastructure, $20 million to destination chargers, across regional New South Wales, and a further $20 million for charging at commuter car parks and transport assets. In 2022, the state budget showed another $38 million allocated to supporting public charging, and $18 million to top off the fast charging initiative to be $149 million, $10 million to roll out curbside chargers, and an extra $10 million to support strata buildings to become EV ready. So let's start with ultra-fast chargers, and in this document, which I'll just scroll down, so ultra-fast chargers is defined as a charger with a capacity up to 350 kilowatts, which is the fastest charger I've seen so far in Australia. How many charging locations can you install for $149 million?
All right, I might start with this one, and maybe Beck's going to jump in on some of these charging questions as well. So look, and there's lots of millions in there, right? So in total, it's $209 million worth of New South Wales government funding for public charging infrastructure. That's a lot. That's going to get a lot of new chargers out there. So I'd first like to start by saying, I guess the New South Wales residents are the luckiest in Australia. We're going to have the most comprehensive public charging network across the state. So New South Wales citizens and visitors are blessed in that way. So in terms of that $149 million, it's a co-contribution, it's co-funding, and so we're expecting that it's capped at 50%. So private industry will also be investing equally, if not more, into the rollout as the government is, and that's appropriate for government seed funding to build out this new network. So for that funding, we're going to build a minimum of 250 charging stations, ultra-fast charging stations right across the state in both metropolitan locations as well as a regional. And the strategy also talks about a coverage commitment of having one of these stations at least every 5 kilometres in metropolitan areas, areas of high density, areas along commuter corridors in cities, as well as having them at 100-kilometre intervals across all of our major highways across New South Wales.
I'll
Okay.
throw a couple more in there on top of that, just to bolster the numbers even further. With the destination charging program, we've got the ability to fund anywhere between 2,500 to 3,500 charges. Given the range of what a destination charger could actually cost at the end of the day, there is quite a big difference between, say, a wall-mounted charger versus a dual-port pedestal. And then we've also got that additional program that you both mentioned, the $10 million for curbside charging. We want to fund at least 500 curbside chargers of all shapes and sizes. I know that we'll get into that later on in this session, but all those chargers combined really builds a seriously comprehensive network across the state, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I saw a couple of pictures of some telegraph pole chargers today, actually, in one of the publications. So that's very exciting. Do you have a minimum number of charging stalls you intend to have at each location?
We do, and you know, I think the polls are really a really good one, and as one of the people said in the chat, these things work together, right? So redundancy and reliability works together with how many charges you have at each location, and so on and so forth. So our minimum number of charges per station is 4. So 2 charging bays with that can charge vehicles at 350 kilowatts, and 2 charging bays that can charge EVs at 175 kilowatts minimum. So 4 charging bays, and that's a minimum. So it's likely that we're going to see stations much larger than that roll out through this program, and so that's around you know, they're high capacity chargers, as you say, and there's plenty of them per station. So it's a question of we're covering off there on both that redundancy question. You know, if you have 1 or perhaps even 2 down or out of service temporarily, what have you, as well as that coverage question of, you know, with modern EVs today, you might decide to skip a station or 2 stations, and you'll still be able to know that you're only 100 kilometers away from the next one.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you know, will they be CCS2 and CharDemo, or still deciding at this stage?
Yeah, so I guess for those people that are really quite interested in the specs and understanding what we're building and what we're going out for, we have our funding guidelines on our web page as well, and that kind of spells out all of the elements, and that's through to like the plug types that will be at these stations, the accessibility requirements, those kind of things, and all of those things are important elements. So in terms of plug types, we realize that, well, the transition is through to CCS2, right? Globally, we generally know that, but from an accessibility point of view, we want to see a CHAdeMO plug at least at each station, because there's Nissan Leafs going around, right? And Outlanders. So there'll be options for both of those at all of the stations, but it is also there's flexibility for the charge point operators who will actually build, own, and operate these stations to choose the kind of makeup of the plugs that they include at each station.
Okay. We've got a question from one of our viewers. What's the New South Wales policy on 24-hour accessibility of rapid charging sites? There are no 24-hour DC charging sites between Marrickville, Bankstown, and Shell Cove. And Peter Cook's one of our Model 3 Uber drivers. Any thoughts on 24-hour accessibility for these sites?
Yeah, I have thoughts, which is that the greater the opening hours, the greater the accessibility, and so that's what we're aiming for. And so from memory, we didn't require 24/7 opening of all of the stations, but that was a merit criteria which we highly focused on. And so most of the stations that'll be rolled out through with New South Wales government funding will be 24/7, and if not, you know, throughout the full business day and the hours on either end of that. Beck, you might want to talk about accessibility around the destination charges as well.
Yeah, yep. So it's a little bit of a different model with destination charging in that the charges that we're co-funding are not being operated by a charge point operator. They're being owned and operated by, you know, a cafe or a winery. So we haven't made it a firm requirement that those sites have to be open 24/7, because often they're not as a business offering anyways, and so they might not want people necessarily coming into their car park charging behind the back of the facility or the building while the premises is unoccupied. But as part of the assessment process, we ask questions around when are you operating your business, what days of the week, what hours of the day, to get an understanding, to make sure that we're getting charges out there that, you know, aren't going to be at a location that's only open for 2 hours on a Sunday once a week. Interestingly and not surprisingly, a lot of the businesses and councils that are applying for destination charges are wholeheartedly supporting, you know, wanting those chargers to be available as long as possible, because it's essentially attracting new visitors to their site and being able to use them while they're there.
Yep. No, that's great. I better take some of these paid questions. So we've got one from Sensei. I think he's got a picture of me there for some reason. Rebecca, Dave, Anna, do you each plan to buy EVs? Thank you, Sensei.
Oh, Dave, I think you should kick us off with this one.
Should I?
Please.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes. Thanks for the question, Sifu. Yes. So I've got a Model Y on order, and I'm very excited. I've got 6 sleeps left till I pick it up next week. So joining the community there. And there's a number of us across government, and within the team who've ordered the BYDs and so on. And look, I think it's a horses for courses thing. So we're very keen to have them. But for some people, like one of the most common things is the electric vehicle. I'll buy an electric vehicle as my next car. That's what most people say, but they're waiting for that model that suits them, or they're to put a few more pennies in the bank, or what have you to do it. But yes, I'm very close.
Yep, that's definitely my answer. Next car, as soon as this one that I'm on at the moment is sort of getting long in the tooth. So the next purchase will definitely be an EV after this.
Very nice.
The same for me, but I would also add, I live in an apartment building, which is not very open to electrification. So it's interesting because I work in a department that it's also trying to address that challenge. So I'm heavily relying on my colleagues to find ways to convince Strata. But apparently, I think my plan will be move out from here, buy a house, and then the car.
Oh, very good.
plan.
I'm glad you're all on the same page. Getting an EV. That's great. And you've got feedback from Gaffer too. Minimum 4 charges per station. I love you with the heart emoji. That's great. There you go. Feeling the love tonight.
Yeah.
Now, Ray has got a question. Here we go. Since Tesla is opening up their chargers to other makers, how likely to get how likely to get more Teslas as they're more reliable? I mean, is there any play from New South Wales government to try to get manufacturers in the country, or getting more stock from manufacturers at all?
Yeah. So maybe 2 parts to that question. So in terms of the charging network, it's a really important. There's a couple of important elements to the charges that New South Wales are funding. So the first is that they'll be fully renewably powered, right? And so this is a similar thing to the Renewable Energy Agency with the charges, the high capacity charges they funded in recent years. But it's an important part of what we're doing as well. All of the charges as well have to be fully accessible, regardless of the charge point operator that installs them. So all vehicles, all brands need to be able to charge at all of the charging stations. So that's on the charger front. So that universal access is really important, right? We don't want to leave any drivers behind. On the models themselves and the manufacturers, I can say that we and all of the other states and territories, I have to say, talk to the manufacturers quite regularly about their electrification plans and the models they're bringing to the country and that kind of thing. And of course, being in delivering on our electric vehicle strategy, we're asking them to, we're encouraging them to bring models to the country as much as possible. And through those measures around rebates, our different governments electrifying their own fleet, we're showing that there's demand. There's a huge demand for electric vehicles, both in the general public and within businesses and governments, and that particularly in New South Wales, we're open for EV business. We want more of them to flow into the state.
Yep, that's great. Now, this question I was going to ask too, so I'll put up this question from Ben. It's about accountability. There's a lot of talk about charges being down currently. Is there any way to ensure that these charges are not down, for a long periods? Like, what accountability are you going to show to these providers?
Yes. Okay. I can start with that one. So look, yes, reliability is really important, and for the driver experience, but also delays in trips and that people getting stuck, that kind of thing. And so we've looked for our fast charging initiative. We've looked globally at what best practice is, what kind of charging uptime other areas are experiencing, more mature markets and that kind of thing, and what's possible. And there's a lot of things to uptime. So there's the regular maintenance schedules, but there's also parts and the time it takes to get parts and things to site. All of those things, natural disasters. A lot of things are at play sometimes. So it's not necessarily entirely simple. But we intend to set really high reliability standards with the chargers we fund, and that's probably at 90% plus reliability or uptime. And so it's quite an important part of the picture of public charging. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I'll also say on the destination front, whilst we don't have the same stringency around those requirements as we'd put on a charge point operator, we're very heavily focused on supporting sites that install destination chargers because they are a small business and, you know, charging isn't their main sort of offering as part of their what they're providing on site. We're really trying to educate them around ensuring that they've got clear signage in place around what the usage requirements are for the chargers, also operating procedures for their staff to know that they actually have a charger installed in their car park, how to use it, what to do if the charger might not be working or a driver is having issues with the charger, and what processes to put in place to actually help rectify that, whether it's contacting the supplier or being able to make some changes on site, but also the importance of overlaying software on top of the charger, because all of the chargers that we specify under the destination charging grants have minimum capabilities that we've specified that the chargers need to have, and all of those have the requirement to be OCPP 1.6 compliant to enable that interoperability, that ability to overlay that software so that an operator or like a motel or a cafe can look at the charger, see what's going on, diagnose issues, and then know how to address those issues, rather than just having the charger installed, something happens and they don't understand why it's working.
No, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that because, yeah, reliability is certainly a big issue at the moment, as we can see from the polls. Let's. I might just skip forward to this question here, which Paul has put up for us. What is your approach to chargers at motels? I want to leave my car plugged in overnight. So that, I guess that segues to a later question in our document. There's talk about EV tourist drives, I think, in this document and also in the New South Wales Government website. I want to hear about an example of a tourist drive or an EV tourist drive. I want to, that we can do in your planning.
Yes, yep. So double-barreled answer then. So I'll start off by saying, Paul, if you're keen to have charging installed at one of your favourite motels, let them know about our grants because they might not know about them. Tell them to visit our website. We've got money that they can access to put a charger in. That goes for everyone sort of watching tonight and listening in. If you've got a particular favourite cafe or spot that you like to go to, let them know and say, hey, I drive an EV. I'll come to your site if you have a charger. Go get some money and install it while there's money available. On the tourist drive front, so the destination charging program's essentially broken into two stages, essentially. So rolling out all of the chargers and getting the majority of the $20 million expended through hardware and software installations across the state. And then we're working really closely with our partner agency, Destination New South Wales, to essentially look at where all those locations are, where all the destination chargers are installed, where all of our fast chargers are installed, where all of our curbside chargers are installed, and existing charging infrastructure that's already making up the existing network, overlaying that across existing tourist drives so that we can pinpoint what are some really cool stops along existing tourist drives, because they're existing tourist drives for a reason. They're really great, beautiful drives to take. But also when we look at that data across the state, looking at potential new drives and where those might be, potentially connecting drives that might get us across borders as well. That would be really cool if we can connect some really cool drives between Victoria, South Australia and Queensland, and then essentially doing an entire campaign around promoting those drives. We're saying, for sites who want to participate in the grant, get your site on the map because it's quite literally going to be that. We're going to be doing a huge campaign around it to not only give current EV drivers the incentive to get out to the regions again and stretch the legs of their EV and go visit the farthest reaches of the state, but also give confidence to new drivers who might be on the fence about buying an EV, overcoming that issue around that perceived range anxiety and saying, hey, it's not actually an issue anymore. We've got this great network out there and some really beautiful places that you can see along the way that are going to give you a really enjoyable visitor experience at the same time.
Yeah. And it's good. It's good point from Paul, because a hotel or accommodation, it's a really good use case for charging, right? Like, so they're long dwell times. People have there's dedicated car parking spots, and it gets you going the next day on a trip. So they're really great use cases. And what we haven't mentioned is that through the destination charging program, these accommodation sites can receive funding for up to 4 chargers at their locations. That's a lot of chargers to start off with, to kick them off on that journey. And we're offering 75% of the funding for those charges as well. So it's a big chunk of the cost for them as well.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that a lot of sites we're realizing maybe don't quite yet grasp, and that's the ability to use the fact that they can have, once they have a charger installed, to actually promote their destination, putting it on PlugShare, putting it on a whole bunch of other sort of online platforms, blasting it out to their current customers, new customers, to say, hey, this is a different offering we've got that we didn't have before, and understanding that that's going to attract, like, EV drivers are going to go out of their way to find the motel or the hotel or the cafe that has the charger if it's new and interesting and has a positive visitor experience while they're going to be there. And they're going to factor that into when they're planning their journeys. So it's this whole new opportunity for a small business out in regional New South Wales to incentivize people to go out of their way to come there and stay a little bit longer, dwell a little bit longer while they're charging, because they don't mind, and maybe spend a little bit more money while they're there as well.
Yep. No, that's a great answer. And I'm just putting my hand up. If any cafe owner, any hotel owner wants me to go and have a look at them,
yes,
let me know. You know my email address. I'd be very happy to promote anyone that helps EV drivers. Now, I want to move on to something else, but I just want to flash a few more comments from Peter, who's pledged a bit of money as well. So I just want to say, I'll just put up his comments. So cheap 25 kilowatt DC chargers at gyms, please, 2 to 3 hours worth of charging at a time. That's a very good point. He also mentioned that possibly, with more chargers installed, scale equals cheaper. $2 million for 50 power poles, $40,000 each. So any thoughts on that potentially?
I think you might have mistaken 50 for 500 for the curbside charging program. We want to get at least 500 out there.
Okay.
Yep. But I think we'll cover
sense.
that a little bit later.
Yep, perfect. And also he said he just made a point that newer highways awful, none at Narrabri or Moree. So there you go.
I might answer that one actually, because it's a really good point. And we've got a big state. And we've got a reasonable nascent network, right? We've got the NRMA chargers. The NRMA have done a great job in getting out a network to just enable a beginning point around travel, which is fantastic. And you have your ChargeFox and your EV networks and your Tesla chargers out there as well. So we've got a starting point. What we did in New South Wales last year is we mapped the entire state, and people who are interested can find it's called the New South Wales EV Fast Charging Master Plan, and that master plan is the creation of a multi-criteria analysis. So we looked at a whole range of features, from traffic volumes through to substation capacity, the uptake of EVs in various locations, nights, overnight stays, that kind of thing, right? About 15 criteria. And through that exercise, we were able to identify what we call optimal zones for fast charging right across the state. So that map, you can delve into it. It's got all of the different layers. You can download the traffic volumes and all of that kind of thing, and the wiring, how much capacity there is in wires and all of those interesting bits of data if you're that way inclined. But what we were able to do is identify 380 zones right across New South Wales, which make up a comprehensive network and are the best places to build chargers. And that includes journey enablement, right? Like those questions around crossing into other states and those less traveled routes and so forth. And those optimal zones are based around, they're kind of bubbles on the map in regional areas, and they're postcodes within metropolitan areas. And also with the data we're able to pull together, we're able to predict how many chargers were required over time. So by 2026 and by 2031, how many chargers are required in that zone. And this, so as I said at the beginning, we're aiming to build out around 250 of those zones through our funding, but it's a great planning tool to say that yes, overall we need all of chargers in all of these different locations to build out a full network across the decade.
Yep, and obviously with more data as time goes on, you'll know where to put the next one. Makes sense.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to curbside charging, Rebecca. What are we talking about? Is it just lampposts as charging points? What other things have you got installed for us?
Yeah, yep. So to take a step back to let everyone know, so in the last budget that was announced in June, we got an additional $10 million added for curbside charging. That wasn't in the original EV strategy package, which is really exciting. We're just starting the program development process now. So it's too early to say what the final technology will be and what format. Lamppost is definitely one of the options that we're looking at. And if anything, we want to see a multitude of different technology types rolled out through this process. We don't necessarily think that there's a one size fits all solution in this particular scenario. It's kind of horses for courses, and we're going to discover that through the next sort of the coming months, essentially. So what we're doing at the moment is looking at what's working overseas and what's not, and then looking at what's happening in Australia as well, domestically, both interstate and within Australia. I saw someone earlier in the chat put a comment about the latest ARENA funding announcement with the IntelliHub program. So we're following programs like that really closely. There's lots of really progressive councils in New South Wales that have already done a lot of different trials, particularly in sort of the eastern suburbs of Sydney, who we're working closely with to track what they're doing. A lot of different DNSPs are looking at different models around lampposts and sort of hot stick technology and whatnot. So there's lots of cool options out there. So we're looking at it all, and we're also going through a process where we're mapping the state, because the priority for curbside charging for us, when you look at it as filling the gap, in addition to what we're doing around fast charging and destination charging, is looking at supporting residents in high density population areas who don't have access to off-street charging opportunities. So we really want to hone in on where those specific locations are, and then identify the technologies and the deployment approach that's most suited for those particular areas. So we'll be going through that program development process over the next 6 to 9 months, with a view to sort of the middle of next year getting that program out into the public domain and spending that $10 million on curbside charging to fill that remaining gap. And I also saw in the chat someone said, the likes of Wollongong are underserved, so we'll be looking at all of those metro locations where we know that fast charging is looking at the charging opportunities for every 5 Ks in metro, but say for destination charging, that's all out in regional New South Wales. So now we're sort of plugging the gaps on the metro side of things as well.
It's a good question about around convenience, right? And charging optionality. So that's the way we see it in New South Wales. It's not just a home charger. It's not just a curbside charger or a fast charger. It's a combination of all of those, right? And as we shift to electric vehicles, people will have different habits and different needs, right? And so curbside charging is really going to enable or allow those people, like Anna maybe, who don't have a charger at home, and many other people, to be able to charge confidently because they've got a lot of them in their street. And then others might be satisfied with the local fast charger, or the 5 at the let's say 50 in a few years at the shops. So it's really important that different options are made available to people over time. Yeah.
Oh, that's great, because as we know, our cities are getting denser, so a lot of people don't have off-street parking, so this is great. Great to see. We might segue into apartment living, actually, but before we do that, just some more feedback for you guys. Try to test it. Thanks for doing what you're doing. So there you go, some more love in the room there.
Thank you.
Let's
virtual high five.
Exactly. Lots of hugs around. Let's segue into apartments and strata living. Retrofitting EV chargers into old buildings can be difficult. I've tried to do my best with some podcasts with viewers who've managed to achieve that as a one-off. How will you ensure new apartments are ready for, or new buildings are ready for EVs? And do you have any strategies for helping owners in older apartment complexes install EV chargers?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the good news is yes to both of those questions. And so starting with new buildings, and so apart from the general trend of developers looking at adding value to their buildings and adding new technologies like solar and batteries and chargers and that kind of thing, that's kind of starting to happen naturally with some of those leaders. But at the national level, it's being looked at really closely at the national level, and there's something called the National Construction Code that happens at the national level, and then it flows down through into state planning instruments, right, and requirements. And so the National Construction Code changes, or it gets amended every 3 years, and it looks as though there's been agreement that in the next update, which is will be live, or will become regulation in October next year, all new buildings will be required to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So for 100% of the car parking spaces. So that I need to say that that's not the chargers themselves, it's not the charging equipment, it's the electrical infrastructure to enable the chargers to be put in place, right? And that's appropriate because it's not the developer, owning the EVs or owning the parking spot and that kind of thing. They're building the building. It's just about enabling it, and then the tenant or the owner can then put in their own charger. So that's on the new build front, which is great. It's really encouraging, and I think it's happened quite quickly given the relatively recent kind of surge in EVs in Australia. On the existing buildings front, in this year's budget, another $10 million is allocated to a program around making strata buildings electric vehicle ready. So again, this is a different proposition because you're retrofitting rather than starting that build out from the beginning, and it's more expensive to retrofit, unfortunately. And so in New South Wales, we've been working for the last 2 years with strata buildings and a little bit with commercial buildings as well, and we've done feasibility studies on 15 buildings, and that has given us a lot of insight, and we've been able to help those buildings understand the options for making their buildings EV ready and making that change to their electrical system. So in the budget, another $10 million was allocated to this program, and it's to support a bit over 100 buildings, medium to large size strata buildings, to become EV ready. And so again, this is a program that we're designing up at the moment, like building up the design and the stakeholders around the space. And we intend to work with a variety of different types of buildings, like different ages, different typologies, different car park layouts, and that kind of thing, and support over 100 of them to do this build out, which is a huge start, and to build the prototypes or the blueprints for all of the other strata buildings to do the same, because there's over 8,000 strata buildings in New South Wales alone. That's a lot, right? So government, and in all these things, it's about the government seed funding and leading the way and enabling, and getting those early adopters and fast followers to take action, and then showing the way for the others. And for those that have the time or the interest, there's already live in a building, a owner, a part of a strata committee, that kind of thing. We've produced a really great toolkit already in New South Wales for buildings to become EV ready. I think you touched on it in a previous video, but it has example strata bylaws so that they can be picked up and applied at the strata level. It's got cost calculators, it's got go-to-market templates, a really active, kind of helpful set of materials to help buildings make the shift now already.
Mm-hmm. I've actually got a video coming up with a gentleman who helped to get 30 car park spots EV ready in his apartment. So everyone watching, Great. Stay tuned and subscribe. That video is coming. But yeah, I guess segue into getting the grid ready for EVs, because obviously we're at 3% uptake at the moment, 30% by 2027. That's a huge jump. What's the future looking like there?
Maybe I'll try to answer this one. So I think the future may look like this. So we shall have bidirectional charging. This means that if we are an EV owner, we can drive back our car home and plug the car in and use our battery to support our electricity needs for our household. And then during the night, we can then redirect the charging flow and use the electricity to recharge the car, and so we can use off-peak rates, and so have much cheaper bills when it comes to electricity. But also in the future, the great potential of electric vehicles can be finally achieved, because we can imagine to have all our electric vehicles networked in a virtual power plant, and in this way, through the support of an energy provider, these electric vehicles can contribute to support the grid, can release electricity to the grid when there is a demand response event, or can even help the grid to address voltage fluctuations, so to help contribute to the stability of the grid itself. So this is what the future could look like, and it's really intriguing. It's great. It's the reason why also I'm so passionate about electric vehicles, because they have this amazing nexus between energy and transport. However, there is still quite a big, long way to go. There are still a number of challenges, especially when it comes to bidirectional charging. We still have to get to a point where we have a recognized standard. And also, at the moment, there's only Nissan Leaf that has the capability of addressing bidirectional function. So there are limitations even with the vehicles that we have. So there is still a long way to go, but probably there are other barriers also around acceptance of this opportunity, because EV drivers will also need to accept to lose a bit control of their vehicles and the batteries that they carry, because the energy providers will need to take control on them to make orchestration and make sure that this exchange with the grid can occur at the right time and in the right way. So there's also need for people to have this shift in the way how they think about their vehicle and what the vehicle can do for them. And certainly there are still some challenges around regulations and how we are going to have these new contracts with our energy providers to define how the connection with the grid will be managed. And so also price signals and all the things around the tariffs. So there are a lot of aspects, both technical, but also in the regulatory space and in the standard space that needs to be addressed. But certainly great potential. Just to give a sense of scale, we have just come across some research done from some of our stakeholders. And if we think about that in the future, all the 5.9 million vehicles in New South Wales, excluding trailers and two-wheels vehicle, that's what so if you think about this 5.9 million, they can carry a storage capacity of 295 gigawatt hours, according to this research, which is very close to the 350 gigawatt hours storage capacity of Snowy Point 2. So it's amazing. So the capability of that storage capacity can really help us address a lot of electricity requirements and achieve more savings and maximize our investment in EVs.
Yeah. And Anna's painted a really great picture of a future there, and also some of the challenges, right? And we know now that the bidirectional charges are really expensive. We know that CCS2, there's a roadmap to get to bidirectional charging, but that's not due for a couple of years. So this is a couple of years down the track, but it's being definitely thought about strongly now, and we're starting to work towards it in different kind of governments and places around the world. It's also fair to say that, and I noticed a few comments about vehicle to grid and some reluctance around having your vehicle controlled by a third party and that kind of thing. That's very natural, right? And that's also a feature of stationary batteries, of air conditioning systems, and so forth. There's different kind of attitude of different people to those to that different varying level of control. Now, one of the great benefits of electric vehicles is that you can do vehicle to home first, or vehicle to appliances, and then further down the track is vehicle to grid. That's the end use case, really, where you're providing services or energy to the grid itself. But the first use case is providing energy to your home or to your site or your building or your dwelling, and that's going to be very common, because these are really large batteries we're talking about, of course. Whereas so the time will tell, and the incentives for the consumer to actually, provide their energy out of their vehicle to the grid need to be set properly, so that there's an incentive for it, and that kind of goes both ways. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say. Sorry, Anna, go.
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, at the moment, a lot of research is exactly around cost and benefits as well. So there is still this is still the main topic which is currently being assessed, and there are a lot of researches currently going on, not only in New South Wales but also in other states, around the real business case for bidirectional chargers, but as well as there are a lot of surveys and studies to understand the preparedness of people to accept this shift in the way how they use their vehicle.
I was going to say it's anything's possible. Like the battery is there, like virtually. Everyone's got not everyone, but everyone. A lot of people will have EVs eventually, but I think the financial incentives is what will push them over to lose control a bit with their power usage. So yeah. That's a great point. Well, let's move on to a point here from Gaffer, who has asked: can tap and go payments be mandated with apps only required to access membership or loyalty discounts? I guess as an EV user, we're starting to see a lot of charging providers supply their own apps. Everyone's got to sign into an app to tap and whatnot. I mean, what are we going to unify all these charging providers from a government point of view, or are we going to let each one have their own system?
Yeah, so the market, as people have pointed out there, the market they've created their own payment systems, right? And there's different apps, and presumably after a while that's a bit of a pain in terms of having different apps, logging in, and all of that kind of thing. And so for the charges we're supporting in out of New South Wales government, it's universal payment systems. It's tap and go. It's payment, card payments, and so that's a requirement of the fast charges we fund. And so that shift will be for those charges we fund in New South Wales, but hopefully start to become broader than that across the networks that these operators run across the country. And that's pretty common overseas and that kind of thing, to have universal payment methods, and we want to see that here. Obviously, it's an accessibility question kind of a thing. Not everyone has their app, or their phone runs out, or there's lots of So yes, it's also saw a question on the Opal card, and yes, the fast chargers will have the capability to accept Opal card payments at the beginning. Whether the Opal card system immediately will be usable to make payments is to be kind of decided, but we're definitely looking at that closely.
Yep, well, that's great. Yep, there's certainly a lot of comments moving around the moment in circles. People getting sick of apps, but I did see what the Ampol AmpCharge app now. There's an auto charge function where I think if you sign up once, you could potentially tap the app or an RFID card moving forward without having to sign in each time. So that could be an option as well. Now there was a comment from Peter. I might just put this up just quickly. Just a suggestion for motorized overhead cables, please. Otherwise, it's a trip hazard for curbside charging.
Yeah, we'll definitely be
Peter.
taking all of those different, there's a lot of, not only from whether a cable is tethered or bring your own, or there's a lot of just general accessibility requirements are going to be really, really important for us to navigate as part of curbside charging, because it's not in your standard sort of off-street parking situation where you've got dedicated bays, etc. There's going to be people on the sidewalk, people walking around. We want to make the chargers as safe and as accessible as possible, and also usable, user-friendly. So, yep, taking all of that into account, definitely.
And Greg's asked, are you guys planning to charge for the curbside chargers? Presumably they're AC, and if so, what price?
Yep, so too early to tell. So we're just going through the initial planning phase at the moment. One thing is for certain, and that is that the New South Wales Government will not be the owners and operators of the chargers. But what we're working through at the moment is the effective model that those charges will be co-funded and distributed throughout New South Wales. So whether that's looking at councils being part of that process, or charge point operators directly, or DNSPs. We're going to look at every possible delivery model, look at the cost benefits and what the best, potential scenarios are, and work through each of those solutions with a key core group of stakeholders that would be impacted by those decisions before we come up with the final logic behind how that's going to be rolled out.
Okay.
And certainly for the fast chargers, we're not getting involved in the pricing. That is up to the charge point operator. And I'd say probably regulatory bodies are starting to think about and look at EV charging pricing in the market, and that will happen as more and more of them come on board. But there's no regulatory settings at the moment, as like you might find with feed-in tariffs and so forth.
And I'd probably also add to that, in terms of the New South Wales Government, it's not our intention to be this sort of asset owner and this asset manager. Really, we're trying to support the EV market within New South Wales to grow and expand, and through sort of funding all of the areas that are currently constraining that growth to happen as rapidly as we want it to happen. So we're really supporting the private sector essentially to help execute some of those things that need to happen to get us towards our goals.
Yep. With the hope that if you've got four chargers for DC, AC chargers everywhere, private enterprise will come in and help out as well, which is better for everyone too. I'll just note too, for our regular viewers, Tesla supercharging has increased to 69 cents per kilowatt hour as of today, just to let you guys and girls know. Question from John Bowley, who's pledged $2.99. Thank you, John. what can be done to discourage charging spots being iced? I guess this can be applied to both curbside charging and fast charging spots as well.
I start with this one because I actually read of a particular piece of information on it today. We get that question a fair bit, probably like everyone does. But those signs you see around like EV charging only and EV for EVs only, or for EVs while charging, that kind of thing. Yes, exactly. They're live signs. They're set into regulation, and compliance can happen, and we know that compliance does happen as well. And so, yeah, if those signs are there, and it's up to local councils to install the signage in public places like that, they're enforceable. So, I think it's a bit early days in Australia. We don't quite have so many EV spots yet, but it's happening. We know it's happening, and we're continuing. The lawmakers are continuing to look at that as time goes on.
In off-street parking scenarios as well, we're definitely encouraging sites that are adding chargers to, again, be very clear with the signage that they provide at particular parking spots, and making it really clear both for the EV driver but the non-EV driver about what the usage requirements are around that spot. And again, back to that sort of operational procedure side of things, informing their staff so that they know what to do if they've got a policy, if they've only got one dedicated spot for a charger in their car park, and it's either being parked in by an ICE vehicle or an EV that might have stayed there all day and might not realize that there's another EV that's pulled up, having a process in place for helping to manage that to make that a positive charging experience for the driver as well.
I don't want to play state of origin, but I think there's one other state that does actually, I think icing is illegal. I can't remember whether it's Victoria or Queensland. Maybe Riz and Rahul can help me. They're from Victoria, so maybe it's not Victoria.
Everything's legal in Victoria, so it's not here.
That's funny. Thank you, Riz.
Yeah, definitely not Victoria, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah,
Might
I think we're well behind the 8 ball.
Okay, and someone did ask me whether I'll be doing something similar for Victoria. Well, Mr. Andrews, give me a call. I'm happy to do the same for you guys too. So.
I'm actually based in Mulgrave, which is his home seat. So I'll bring him along for next time. I've got a chair next to me for that.
Perfect. Thank you, Riz.
Got him on speed dial.
All right, let's move on to... all right, so my understanding is that the New South Wales Government is fully funding the NRMA EV Drive Days, which, congratulations, by the way. I attended one in St Ives a few weeks ago, which is fantastic. Are there any further plans to help raise awareness and provide education of EVs at future events or through other mediums?
Yeah, there is definitely. So, so New South Wales is funding 30 of these drive days over a 12 to 18 month period. So our partners are the NRMA and Origin Energy as well. So at least 30 over the next kind of 12 to 18 months. We've already run about 6 or 7 around the state. The next couple are going to be there's going to be one in Wagga Wagga in September as well coming up. So that's an exciting one. So regionally as well. And so that's really important, that kind of exposure, getting people driving electric vehicles for the first time. Those drive days and the media and attention around them is really key, because we know there's a ripple effect with electric vehicles. Everyone that's tried one, everyone that owns one, and their passengers start to understand it and become comfortable with the technology. So we supporting those EV drive days is really important. Alongside that, we also, as a government, provide lots of information about the basics of electric vehicle ownership and charging and those kind of things. And so do lots of other organisations. The NRMA has a great EV charging hub online and those kind of things. And so I think telling those stories and having that information come from credible sources is really important. And so we're continuing to do that. And then there's another piece to the puzzle, which is around talking about the emissions performance of vehicles in general. So like the shift to low emissions vehicles as well as zero emissions vehicles, because there's a spectrum there. And so New South Wales has been working on a vehicle emissions star rating scheme. So similar to what you might see on a television or a fridge or what have you, an appliance when you purchase it, a star rating scheme to apply to new and used vehicles, light vehicles, which kind of keep we'll keep you posted on that. It's kind of coming in the next 6 months or so. But that's something that we committed to in our net zero plan back in 2020, and that we intend to put to market soon. So that's a real good that's a good way of comparing the performance of vehicles, and for people as they start thinking about their next car and their car purchasing journey, can actually compare and see what the performance of different vehicles are. And it might be that they shift to a plug-in electric vehicle, or just move to a much more lower emissions vehicle as their next vehicle choice. And that's okay. But ultimately, they'll see that electric vehicles have the greatest CO2 performance through that scheme. Yeah,
That sounds very much like a fuel efficiency standards there, Dave.
Yeah, so it's not a fuel efficiency standard, so it has no regulatory weight, but it's a good question, and of course that fuel efficiency standard is a really hot topic, but that's a responsibility of the Commonwealth government. So states can't put in place a fuel efficiency standard, but the intent is that it applies to a vehicle. This star rating may apply to a vehicle whether you purchase it in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, or what have you. It's agnostic to location. So yeah.
Okay. Kind of like a choice rating, maybe, just to show you what the car's like. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, let's touch on road user charge. So we touched on that earlier. So it's coming into effect in 2027, or when new car sales reach 30% for EVs. Is this set in stone, or will there be further discussion in Parliament before it's passed in 2027? And obviously, is New South Wales watching other states like Victoria with their current road user charge?
Yeah, we are definitely, and we talk to the other states. We watch what's happening in other jurisdictions really closely, and I think the thing about the road user charge is that there's a lot of thinking and opinions and positions on different sides of the picture about how and whether we charge electric vehicles to use the road and so forth. So New South Wales has taken the position that to have a road user charge for electric vehicles is a fair and sustainable way of charging users of our roads, and the intent is to shift away from. There's a natural shift away from the fuel excise, which is collecting money essentially to maintain and build roads. It's collected at the Commonwealth level, and so every litre of petrol that's not sold anymore is that fuel excise or tax isn't collected. So it's appropriate over time to collect it in another means, because it's about the use of the roads, and electric vehicles use the roads like any other vehicle. But really in New South Wales, the focus was on uptake first, on supporting uptake for many, many years. And the reason we set that 30% sales target before it kicked in, or back in out through to 2027, was to ensure that the ball was well and truly rolling, and that the benefits were being realised, and there's no turning back for electric vehicles before any charge was applied. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so of course, there's discussion on fuel excise and where the money actually goes, but that might be a discussion for another day.
Right.
So Riz, I might get Riz to help us with this next part. Actually, this will interest representatives from New South Wales Government and also our viewers. I might add this to the stream right now. So Riz from Carloop has kindly drawn this up for us. Let me just make this smaller. There we go. So Riz, can you run us through this infogram you've got for us?
Yep, cool. So basically we wanted to try and look at a snapshot of where EV uptake is at in New South Wales and sort of correlate it to the number of fast chargers, and just think about the general sentiment that EV users have around it, and also look at different parts of New South Wales that have a relatively higher sort of EV uptake. And one of the things we sort of noticed, just before later this afternoon, we've received data that we've analysed now to look at what's happened in the month of August in New South Wales, and just looking at those two bits of information. Tesla uptake in the month of August up 18%. So there's 18% more Teslas on the road at the end of August than there were in the beginning of August. That's a huge jump. When it comes to particularly EV uptake in itself. And then the EV uptake in the month of August has gone up by 11%, or nearly 11%. That's also a significant jump. A lot of it is to do with the Tesla delivery starting to come in and playing a bigger role in the whole EV uptake picture. That, on top of that, we sort of tried to look a bit deeper as to where this uptake is occurring, and we looked at top 3 regions when it comes to LGAs. Northern Beaches, Sydney, and how do you say that? Ku-ring-gai? Ku-ring-gai. So they're sort of the three leaders when it comes to the most amount of EVs that are currently in those regions or parts of Sydney and New South Wales. And we were able to map this all across pretty much everywhere in New South Wales, different regions, and sort of get an idea of where things are at, and that's sort of updated monthly so we can keep a track of where things are happening, whether the government policies are working in certain areas versus others. To a certain degree, we looked at some of the different LGAs that have EV strategies in place and those that are currently developing it. And yeah, the EV uptake is certainly higher, particularly in affluent areas, as we know. So there's a bit of work to do around areas where, you know, the EV uptake isn't up there, and understanding what some of those reasons are. Also recognize this, I think a couple of days ago, France has rolled out a new scheme that they're working on to make EVs more accessible to those on lower incomes. That includes things like that people are able to lease an EV for less than 100 euros a month. That's the sort of different, you know, innovative policies that are coming in place to encourage those areas where there's currently not enough EV uptake in New South Wales that could potentially help those people sort of get on the EV train as well. And then on the bottom here, we've got sort of sentiment analysis around different topics. And what we've done with this one is actually pretty special, because we've had, for the last 2 weeks, we've had live streams like this one covering different topics. So we had one on fast charging infrastructure 2 weeks ago, and then last week we covered EV models. And out of all of them, we were able to analyze what, you know, our audience was saying around those particular topics, and then sort of put a sentiment and a weightage to each one of the topics that fall under those categories. So under government policy, the things that really stood out were around reliability of chargers. So there needs to be a metric of some sort, which I think Dave, Beck, and Anna, you'd sort of touched on, that's part of the policy or the future rollout of DC fast chargers. It's the biggest bugbear that most EV owners have today, and having more charging bays. One of the more interesting ones was around charging maps for councils. So currently, some of the councils do offer a page on their website to allow residents to find out a bit more about EV chargers, but it says something along the lines of, oh, please visit PlugShare and you'll be able to get everything. And when people end up onto PlugShare, it's a whole map of Australia. What am I looking for? It's not really well explained. So there needs to be probably a bit more work around explaining those things to local residents. So what is available in their local area in terms of charging, because they don't want to go to the map of Australia and then figure out where am I again. So there's a little bit of work around that we've identified that EV owners would like to see that being done better. And that's part of education and learning as well. On the fast chargers front, which is the next one, there is a couple of different topics that are quite important to EV owners and those that are waiting for their EVs to be delivered, around, once again, more charging bays, superchargers, charger locations. We've seen a lot in the chat tonight. Similar sort of themes come up around not enough chargers in that location, or accessibility issues. Distances between chargers are a big issue, which, you know, this strategy will aim to reduce those things into the future. So it's great to see that, you know, the new EV strategy in New South Wales does look at some of those areas and how they can be rectified into the future, and which will make it easier for most EV owners to get on the road and hopefully be able to charge without getting iced charging spots and other things we've touched on. The EV models one is quite interesting as well, because Tesla, obviously being as large as they are at a different price point to what most people can afford and would like to, you know, have an aspiration of wanting to get an EV. So BYD has been a hot topic because they're one of the first ones to bring in a ground-up electric vehicle into the Australian market. Believe not far from first customer deliveries as well. And new models seems to pop up quite a bit, like we need more options, which we've touched on earlier on in the stream, and how the government can facilitate at state level and then at federal level to bring more and more brands into Australia, some that currently don't exist, such as, BYD didn't exist about 12, 18 months ago, offering passenger vehicles. So we need to encourage or find ways of encouraging those manufacturers who currently don't take Australian sort of EV uptake seriously enough to sort of start to explore it a bit more, and then have those options available to those considering to buy an EV as such. Then we sort of also, a couple of weeks ago, we did an analysis on thousands of comments of PlugShare and other social media networks talking about charging infrastructure. And we looked at what causes positive sentiment for people, EV owners that are looking at the charging infrastructure. They get very excited when there's a new site, when things are working well. NRMA seems to come up quite a bit because of their relatively large free network, or has been free to most users, and when the charger is charging fast, which is what they expect from a fast charger. So that's some of the positive things. And then we also looked at things where things need to improve. You can see what's highlighted there: tritium chargers not working, iced, broken screens, errors. They're the things that really sort of get on EV owners' nerves today, which hopefully with future rollouts of DC chargers, there is, let's say, more brands that are available as part of the charging infrastructure, and not just relying on one, because that seems to be one of the most annoying things that people are finding as part of our sentiment analysis on the charging side of things.
And I just want to thank actually our viewers who comment all the time on the live chat. It's as you can see, it's invaluable. Your comments are actually what's helping this word map here. So, this is great market research for government and private enterprise as well. So thank you, viewers, tuning in each week. And a bit of state of origin too. So today, New South Wales is definitely leading the pack for DC fast chargers. You can see that, ladies and gentlemen, 131, Victoria 76. So just saying, New South Wales is ahead currently. And looking at proposed sites, New South Wales is still ahead, 500 proposed sites. South Australia is 140. Oh, that's actually not the scale. So
yeah, the scale's a bit off on that one.
Yeah. There you go. Further ahead. And ACT 77, and then the rest. So, yeah. Thank you, Riz, once again from Carloop. As always, creating such a fantastic snapshot for us. If anybody is watching wanting more data, you know where to go. Carloop information. Thanks, Riz. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I think we might wrap up there. Any final thoughts from Dave, Beck, or Anna?
Yeah, I'd probably close out just by saying, well, obviously, thank you very much for having us on the live stream. Really, really pleased to be here and to let everyone know what's going on. And I guess a shout out to everyone in my team. There's lots of other people behind the scenes that are working really super hard on this in New South Wales to get EV uptake happening, but also in other parts of government, in Treasury, in Revenue New South Wales, in Transport for New South Wales, on all of this electrification. It doesn't just happen. It's a lot of people making it happen, on electric buses and cars, and even looking at trucks and freight and that kind of thing. So there's a lot happening. It's a really great community that's here. Obviously, you see that in all the comments, but it's a really savvy group of people as well. So we'd really encourage you, like Beck said before, right? You know about these programs and you visit sites and you have the information. So tell people about it. Encourage like fleets, businesses, in regional areas to take up our grants and get moving, because the faster we can do it, the more EVs we'll have on the road. So really positive, and I guess thanks for having us.
It's my absolute pleasure. So thank you, Dave. Thank you, Beck. Thank you, Anna, for coming on the stream. Like, I've certainly found it informative. I'm sure Riz and Rahul have as well. And judging from the stream tonight, from the chat, getting a lot of positive comments. So yeah, from me as a New South Wales resident, thank you for what you're doing, and hopefully you'll encourage other states to do the same.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Tom.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
My
you for
pleasure.
having us. Yes.
It's my absolute pleasure. And thank you again to Riz and Rahul, regular guests, for coming on as usual.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for the data. That was amazing. I really enjoyed it.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
We're very lucky to have Riz. He's very good. All right, everyone. Well, that's it from myself, Tess, from Tom, from Ludicrous Feed. Thank you for watching. And yeah, thank you again for participating in the chat, everyone, in the live stream. And if you're watching on replay, congratulations on making it this far. And don't forget to leave a comment as well. It'd be good to see what you think as well. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our viewers. And I shall see you all next time on Ludicrous Feed. Happy charging. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.